$347,000. That's what Turning Point USA called youth engagement. But it didn't land in classrooms. It landed in a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas, with a private DJ and a $45,000 bar tab, $2.3 million spent on student leadership conferences. Yet the guest list read more like a VIP donor retreat. And then came the kicker. $15 million, foreign money, funneled through shell organizations into American politics. Russian oligarchs, Chinese real estate tycoons, a Saudi prince, all buying influence behind a red, white, and blue curtain. This wasn't a scandal. It was treason wrapped in patriotism. And the man at the center, Charlie Kirk, the clean-cut conservative darling who built his empire on the backs of college students and the savings of grandmothers who believed they were funding a cause. But on that Thursday morning, the lies ended, because Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett walked into that hearing room with 5 years of receipts, testimony, and decoded communications prepared to burn the whole illusion to the ground. And when the smoke cleared, America would see exactly what had been hiding in plain sight. The morning began, like any other congressional hearing. Stiff suits, paper shuffles, murmurs of procedural language. But something in the air felt different. You could taste the unease. But 10 o'clock, every seat in the Oversight Committee chamber was filled. The walls held more than echoes. They held secrets. And today, one of them was going to burn. At the witness table sat Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA, 30 years old, flanked by lawyers and drowning in confidence. He wore the look of a man used to applause, not accountability. His social media reach rivaled news networks. His speaking fees reached into 6 figures, and his influence over conservative youth, near absolute. But across the room sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, freshman Democrat from Texas's 30th District, civil rights lawyer, no stranger to smoke and fire. She came not for sound bites. She came with documents, testimonies, and truth. And she knew exactly where to start. Mr. Kirk, she began, voice steady as granite. You told the American people that Turning Point is an educational nonprofit. You raise money on promises of student empowerment, civic literacy, and free speech. But I want to ask, what lesson does a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas teach a college freshman struggling to pay rent? She did not wait for a reply. From her folder, she pulled a receipt. $347,000, labeled youth engagement, routed directly to a beachfront resort. The invoice included a private DJ, open bar, and yacht rental. Kirk adjusted his tie. We host donor retreats that include students, he said, his voice engineered for talk radio, not cross-examination. Crockett's eyes narrowed. You mean 50 students? Buried among 200 donors and staff. Because I have sworn testimony from former employees stating that ratio is typical, a beat past. The room, packed with reporters and staffers, went dead silent. Kirk tried again. We're proud of every event. We inspire the next generation. She cut him off. Inspire them with what? Lavish parties and lies. She flipped to a different tab. Let us talk about January 2023. A conference at the Ritz-Carlton in Phoenix. $45,000 on alcohol, $30,000 on a private DJ, and $75,000 on something listed as executive team building. What exactly are you building? Mr. Kirk student leaders or corporate perks? Gasps rippled. Flashes from cameras lit the room. He fumbled his response. The organization runs large-scale operations. And you mean an operation that paid you $350,000 in base salary last year? Crockett asked. And that's before we get into the $500,000 in speaking fees from affiliated groups, or the private jet, valued at over $1 million in flight time, or the luxury apartment in Phoenix, listed as an office, but featuring an in-unit jacuzzi and marble wet bar. She was not speaking to him anymore. She was speaking to America. You claim to be a patriot, a soldier for conservative values. But what I see is a man using non-profit donations from grandmothers in Georgia and veterans in Ohio to fund a lifestyle that would embarrass a Wall Street banker. Kirk tried to regain ground. My compensation is set by the board. Crockett smiled. Let us talk about that board. Your childhood friend, your former business partner, and 3 mega donors who received exclusive benefits including VIP access, international travel, and even shared jet time. The Republicans on the committee squirmed. Some stared at their phones. Others studied the ceiling. Everyone knew this was not about partisanship. This was about math. Mr. Kirk, Crockett said, pausing for full effect. Do you know how many of your so-called student chapters actually exist? My office contacted 100 random schools listed on your website. 73 reported, no chapter at all. 15 said the chapter consisted of fewer than 5 members. He blinked. The camera zoomed in. His lips parted, but no sound came. You inflated your numbers, she continued. You lied to donors. You paid yourself like a CEO and dressed it up as activism. This was no longer a hearing. It was a reckoning. And the man who claimed to speak for America's youth had nothing left to say. The first hour of testimony had stripped away the polish. Charlie Kirk, once the poster boy of conservative youth politics, now sat visibly sweating under the Congressional spotlight. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't done. She hadn't even begun to swing the hammer. Let's move from the resorts and the parties, she said, flipping to a section marked with blood-red tabs. Let's talk about your numbers. Kirk straightened. This was familiar ground. Turning Point USA has over 3,000 chapters across college campuses nationwide, he said, reciting a line delivered countless times on Fox News and donor dinners. 3,000. Crockett repeated slowly. But we sampled 100 of those schools. You know how many confirmed an active chapter? She let the pause stretch long enough for cameras to catch Kirk's shifting posture. 12. Another 15 had between 2 and 5 inactive members. The rest, nothing. A flick of her wrist, and a poster board rose behind her bold red numbers. 73 schools. No chapters. Is it standard practice? She asked. To report non-existent chapters to boost your influence with donors. Kirk reached for his water but didn't drink. We provide resources to students nationwide. Crockett cued in. Resource. Don't equal chapters. Mr. Kirk. And lying to donors is not a clerical error. It's fraud. Kirk's lawyer leaned in, whispering. But Crockett had already moved on. We've talked about spending. Let's talk about your vendors. Another tab. Another sheet. Another bomb. Your media production vendor. American Edge Solutions receiving over $2 million from Turning Point between 2021 and 2023 is owned by your college roommate and current groomsman. No public bid. No competitive pricing. Just a sweetheart deal. Kirk opened his mouth. She silenced him with a glance. And your events vendor Next Gen Patriot Logistics is co-owned by your cousin and your former girlfriend. Again, no bidding, no oversight, no transparency. Is this how fiscal conservatives manage money? Mr. Kirk. He tried to answer, but she was already flipping again. You preach responsibility to working-class students, but your organization spent. She lifted the document $1.2 million on private aviation last year alone, jetting between rallies, conferences, and your personal speaking engagements. Do those jets educate anybody? Reporters scribbled furiously. Flashbulbs exploded. On Twitter, the Charlie Kirk meltdown tag had reached over 1 million mentions. Let's talk about one of those engagements. Crockett said, you charged a Turning Point affiliate $75,000 for a keynote speech, then billed the main organization for travel costs and prep time. Double dipping. On donor funds. Kirk looked stunned. This wasn't a grilling. This was a cross-examination. You claim this is about politics. He finally snapped. You don't like me beliefs. So you're trying to destroy me. I don't care about your politics. Crockett replied coldly. I care about fraud. I care about abuse of non-profit status. And I care about elderly Don. A new document appeared on the screen. Let me read an email from Dorothy Williams, 82 years old, Arkansas. A widow. Sent her entire $5,000 stimulus check to Turning Point because she believed you were building a better future. And then she found out about the bar tabs, the jets, the lies. Kirk stared at the table. I also have statements from James Patterson, 19, unpaid intern, worked 60-hour weeks for 6 months. No stipend. No support. Used promises. Meanwhile, you were leasing Bentleys and writing off poolside retreats as team building. Across the aisle, Republican members shifted uncomfortably. They knew Crockett wasn't bluffing. She wasn't grandstanding. She had the receipts. Your board is compromised. Your numbers are inflated. Your vendors are cronies. Your lifestyle is obscene. And your organization is built on exploitation. She paused. Is this what patriotism looks like in 21st century America? Taking the hopes of young conservatives and turning them into private equity for one man. Kirk opened his mouth. Crockett beat him to it. I'm not finished. She reached for a final folder. Thick. Heavy. Marked. The Phoenix Project. And with that, the temperature in the room dropped. For a moment, everything froze. Even the reporters stopped typing. Charlie Kirk blinked slowly, as if the folder in Crockett's hand was a ghost from a past he had buried too deep to name. Mr. Kirk, she said, her voice colder now. More deliberate. Do you know what the Phoenix Project is? I'm not sure what you mean, he replied, but his voice cracked, splitting like old wood under pressure. Really? Crockett opened the folder. Because I have here a comprehensive paper trail. Emails, bank records, testimonials, and audio transcripts, each one documenting a covert operation. Your organization coordinated to channel foreign money into American political campaigns. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Crockett continued unfazed. $15 million, she said, locking eyes with Kirk. That's the amount Turning Point USA funneled from foreign nationals, a Russian oligarch, a Chinese real estate developer with ties to the Communist Party, and a Saudi royal with interests in American energy policy. Murmurs exploded behind the press table. Committee members leaned forward. The weight of the allegation hit like a brick to the chest. Kirk's lawyer grabbed his arm and whispered fast. Kirk didn't move. You took money from individuals banned from contributing to American politics. Crockett said, you laundered it through fake grassroots organizations, disguised the origin, and redirected it into campaign coffers of candidates aligned with your agenda. She held up a flowchart. It showed bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell corporations in Nevada, and PACs linked to Turning Point USA. The arrows traced a clear path from foreign wire transfers to domestic political influence. You didn't just violate nonprofit law, Crockett said. You violated federal election law. And depending on the interpretation, this could be considered foreign interference in a United States election. Kirk finally moved, just a shift in his chair, a glance to the door. He looked like a man deciding whether to run or faint. Crockett reached for the next exhibit. This is a transcript from a leadership meeting in December 2023, she said. An internal recording. You, Mr. Kirk, are heard instructing your finance director to, and I quote, make sure the Phoenix money is completely untraceable. We cannot afford a donor scandal in 2024. Someone in the back of the room let out an audible, oh my God. Another voice on the tape, the CFOs asked, what if we get caught? And Kirk replied, then we blame a rogue staffer and claim it was never sanctioned. I would need to review the context of that conversation. Kirk said stiffly, you will have plenty of time to do that. Crockett said, when the Department of Justice finishes what they've already begun, more flashes, more gasps. Yes, Mr. Kirk, she said, the FBI has been investigating you for over a year. I have here a transcript from a meeting with one of their undercover informants. She held up another page. In that recording, you're quoted saying, the Arabs pay well. As long as the paperwork looks clean, we'll never have a problem. Oh, Kirk's lawyer lunged toward the mic. My client invokes his Fifth Amendment right. That's his right, Crockett said, flipping to the next document. But the documents speak volumes. She raised a resignation letter. This is from Michael Stevens, your former CFO. He resigned last month and is now cooperating with federal investigators. In this letter, he outlines exactly how the Phoenix Project was conceived, executed, and concealed, and how you personally signed off on the transfers. Kirk stared straight ahead, lips pressed white, jaw clenched. You sold out the very country you claimed to protect. Crockett said, you took money from adversaries and used it to manipulate elections, fund disinformation, and suppress votes in communities of color. She turned to the committee. The Phoenix Project wasn't just corruption. It was sabotage of American democracy, bought and paid for by foreign agents. Kirk finally stood, his chair clattered behind him. "This is a setup," he shouted. "This is the deep state attacking a successful conservative." Crockett didn't flinch. "Sit down. Mr. Kirk, whether you stand or not, justice is coming." When the hearing adjourned, the headlines exploded faster than anyone could refresh their phones. Charlie Kirk meltdown trended worldwide. CNN ran red banners for 3 hours straight. MSNBC looped Crockett's takedown like it was Game 7 of the NBA Finals. Fox News, silent. Their golden boy had vanished from the lineup overnight. But this wasn't just media frenzy. It was a reckoning. Within 24 hours, Turning Point USA's board scrambled into emergency session. By sunset, 3 of them had resigned. By dawn, Charlie Kirk was placed on administrative leave. Not fired yet, but stripped of his podium, his platform, his pride. Then came federal boots on the ground. FBI agents raided Turning Point's Phoenix headquarters like they were serving a cartel kingpin. Cameras captured them, hauling out boxes of hard drives and black briefcases marked evidence. Neighbors watched agents roll out from Kirk's personal home, silent as ghosts, carrying more than just files. They carried his legacy in handcuffs. Kirk's response, a meltdown masquerading as defiance. He posted a video from his kitchen, still wearing his tailored suit, face glistening with stress. "This is a witch hunt," he claimed. "A deep state operation. They're trying to cancel me for loving America." But the words didn't land. The usual chorus of MAGA influencers stayed quiet. Some unfollowed. Others deleted tweets of support. Even his most loyal digital soldiers dropped their weapons, realizing the battle was over before it even began. The political fallout was just beginning. Members of Congress, who had once appeared with Kirk, smiling proudly at Turning Point galas, now tripped over each other to distance themselves. Those donations were made in good faith. One Republican claimed on air, "We had no knowledge of wrongdoing," but Crockett wasn't letting them off that easy. Congresswoman Jasmine. Latest news was everywhere. She appeared on Morning Joe, then the readout, then gave a thunderous interview on The Breakfast Club. Calm, composed, and unshaken. She repeated the same message. This isn't about left or right. This is about right and wrong. Then came the lawsuits. Dozens of former donors filed a class action suit against Turning Point USA. Many were elderly retirees who had scraped together $20,024.50, even $5,000 to support what they believed was a movement for young conservatives. Instead, their money had bought bar tabs in Cabo and private jets across the country. Dorothy Williams, the widow from Arkansas who sent her entire stimulus check, became the face of betrayal. Her handwritten letter, read aloud by Crockett in the hearing, now circulated online like scripture. "I believed in you," she had written. "You spent my hope on liquor and lies." And the impact didn't stop with donors. Students broke ranks. Young conservatives, who had idolized Kirk, began flooding social media with messages of heartbreak. Some were chapter presidents, who had volunteered years of unpaid work. Others had defended Kirk in debates, arguments, classrooms. Now, they watched as the man they trusted was revealed as a fraud. One tweet hit harder than most. "I gave 3 years of my life to this organization. I lost friends defending Charlie Kirk. Turns out I was just helping him get rich. I feel sick." The United States Congress' latest news covered more than just the scandal. It began to question the system itself. If Turning Point USA could get away with this for so long, how many others were doing the same? The IRS announced a sweeping review of tax-exempt political groups. The Department of Justice hinted at more indictments. And Crockett. She wasn't done. She had already shifted her oversight committee's sights onto the next name on her list. The cultural ripple was seismic. Universities began revising their student political group policies. Donors demanded line-item transparency before writing another check. And political consultants across the spectrum started whispering one new cautionary phrase: "Don't pull a Kirk." Because Charlie Kirk's fall wasn't just his own. He had built an empire on loyalty, propaganda, and unchecked power. And in less than 7 days, Jasmine Crockett had dismantled it piece by piece, lie by lie. Her performance was studied, yes, admired, certainly, but more than anything, it was feared. Because now, on Capitol Hill, one thing was understood clearly. If Crockett has the receipts run, it didn't come with a press conference or patriotic fanfare. No stars and stripes backdrop. No smug defense from cable news loyalists. Just a PDF quietly uploaded to the DOJ website, all 147 counts of federal indictment against Charlie Kirk and 6 high-ranking Turning Point USA executives. But once it hit the wires, the ground shook. Wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, obstruction, false tax filings, violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Each count bore the weight of decades in federal prison. But more than the charges themselves, it was what they revealed that set Washington ablaze. The confirmation that one of the most powerful voices in conservative youth politics was running what prosecutors called a deliberate, sustained, and deeply coordinated criminal enterprise designed to defraud the public and subvert American democracy. In short, Charlie Kirk wasn't a patriot. He was a profiteer. And the smoking gun? A shadow operation known inside Turning Point as the Phoenix Project. According to the indictment, Phoenix wasn't a political initiative. It was a covert pipeline, a money laundering scheme involving 3 foreign regimes and at least a dozen shell companies. Between 2020 and 2024, over $15 million flowed into Turning Point through offshore accounts in Dubai, the Cayman Islands, and Macau. The donors, a Russian oligarch under U.S. sanctions, a Chinese real estate magnate tied to state surveillance programs, and a Saudi oil heir with ambitions to influence American energy legislation. The money was scrubbed, disguised as charitable donations, and rerouted into domestic political campaigns, many of which endorsed voter suppression measures, anti-immigrant legislation, and corporate deregulation that directly benefited those same foreign investors. This wasn't just fraud. This was geopolitical betrayal. The indictment quoted from internal emails, encrypted chats, and whistleblower testimonies. One line, allegedly from Kirk himself, read, "Get the Phoenix cash into super PACs by Q3. No visibility. Full firewall. Make it clean." Another message, this time to his CFO, said, "The Russians are impatient. They want movement on deregulation. Tell them we're handling it." The paper trail was undeniable. Prosecutors even had audio from a 2023 leadership retreat, where Kirk told senior staff, "We sell the flag to grandma, and we sell influence to the world. That's how you build an empire." But the empire was rotting from within. Among the most damning revelations was the exploitation of Turning Point's own grassroots. The indictment detailed how hundreds of young conservatives worked unpaid internships, organized on campuses, and raised small-dollar donations while Kirk was collecting $500, 0 inches, speaking fees from his own shell, non-profits, billing $1, 2 million, in private jet usage, and living in a $3, 4 million Phoenix condo listed as an educational satellite office. The DOJ named dozens of false expenditures, a $347, 000, youth conference held at a private island resort in Belize, a $96, 000, executive development trip to Monaco, a $75, 000, strategic planning session in a Las Vegas casino penthouse, all tax-deductible, all paid by donations from retirees, veterans, and students. One entry struck a particular chord, a handwritten note from Dorothy Williams, the 82-year-old widow whose $5, 000 stimulus donation was used, in part, to pay for an executive cigar tasting in Manhattan. Her letter, now part of public record, read, "I thought I was helping save America, but I guess I was buying cigars for Charlie Kirk." The indictment didn't just break the news cycle. It cracked the conservative donor class in half. Within 48 hours, dozens of Republican lawmakers returned or redirected Turning Point contributions. Campaign treasurers scrambled to reassess filings. Conservative think tanks purged mentions of Kirk from their websites. Prominent megadonors issued statements of deep regret. Kirk's remaining defenders, Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, Candace Owens, offered carefully worded silence. Turning Point USA's board, held an emergency vote. By week's end, the organization suspended all operations, pending investigation, offices shuttered, staff furloughed. The brand that once plastered college campuses from Tallahassee to Tacoma had collapsed under the weight of its own deception, and Charlie Kirk, nowhere to be found. His mugshot hadn't been released. His legal team issued a bland statement about vigorously contesting these allegations, but the public had already made up its mind. To many Americans, especially the black elders who had lived through COINTELPRO, Reaganomics, and the moral majority, this was nothing new, just another man in a suit, hiding greed behind God and country. The question now wasn't whether Charlie Kirk was guilty. The indictment spoke for itself. The question was, how deep did this corruption run, and who else was willing to follow him down? The indictment had barely landed when the ripple effects began crashing through every corner of conservative America, like a dam that had been whispering of cracks for years. The pressure finally gave way, and the flood didn't care who got swept away. Within 24 hours, 3 of Turning Point USA's top board members resigned. Their statements were terse, hollow, and full of legalese, attempting to create distance from a man whose name had become political poison. But it was too late. Their names were already on documents, their photos already in donor banquets beside Charlie Kirk's ever-smirking face. One former board member tried to downplay the scandal by suggesting accounting errors and communications lapses. But journalists quickly unearthed emails in which he personally approved questionable contracts and luxury perks. His statements only made things worse. By week's end, the organization that had once boasted $80 million in annual revenue found itself frozen out by major donors. Grassroots contributors, many of them older Americans, began calling in droves, demanding to know where their money had gone. Some were in tears. Some were furious. All of them felt betrayed. A 72-year-old veteran from Ohio called into C-SPAN during a morning broadcast and said, "I sent those kids my rent money because I believed in the mission. I thought I was helping the next generation learn how to love America. Turns out, I was just paying for Charlie's champagne." The comment went viral. It became a slogan, champagne conservatism. Suddenly, even politicians who had once proudly stood shoulder to shoulder with Kirk were deleting old tweets, scrubbing photos, and offering carefully crafted condemnations. But Crockett wasn't finished. She sent letters to 22 elected officials who had received Turning Point-backed campaign funds, requesting that they publicly disclose whether any of those contributions were tied to foreign money from the Phoenix Project. 2 senators and 4 House representatives lawyered up within 72 hours. Others held emergency press conferences, each trying to outrun the shadow now following them. It didn't help that Crockett's team had also released a comprehensive timeline of financial transfers, showing how Turning Point funneled cash through shell nonprofits into political action committees. Each time a politician tried to claim innocence, Crockett's team released another document. Meanwhile, conservative commentators scrambled. The usual defenders of Kirk on Fox News, The Daily Wire, and Blaze TV suddenly pivoted to language like deep disappointment. If true, very concerning, and we don't condone misuse of donor trust. Some tried to claim they never fully supported Kirk, despite years of appearing on his podcast and promoting his events. But the most visible fracture came from within the youth movement itself. Turning Point chapters across college campuses began dissolving overnight. Some students were heartbroken. Others were enraged. "We spent hours tabling, organizing, recruiting," one former chapter leader wrote on Instagram. "Now, I find out we were being used, not for ideas, not for change, but for someone's private jets and backroom deals." Crockett, meanwhile, remained focused. She wasn't giving victory speeches. She wasn't throwing punches on Twitter. She was working. Her staff was already compiling evidence for the next round of hearings, this time targeting organizations adjacent to Turning Point that had received funds from the same foreign sources. She met with FBI agents, IRS officials, and national security experts behind closed doors. There were whispered concerns that the Phoenix Project might not be an isolated scheme, but part of a broader network aimed at undermining American democracy from within. The Department of Justice confirmed that they were investigating similar patterns in at least 3 other high-profile nonprofits. Rumors swirled about connections to lobbying groups, influencer networks, even some cable news producers. And all the while, Charlie Kirk sat in pretrial confinement, isolated, defiant, still insisting he was the victim of a political witch hunt. But outside those walls, the truth had already taken root. The illusion had shattered. The empire had crumbled. And as Crockett prepared for what came next, she reminded the country of something both simple and powerful. Accountability isn't partisan, it's patriotic. The morning after the hearing, the country woke to headlines that didn't mince words. Turning Point turns toxic. Kirk crashes under congressional heat. The Crockett crossfire. Every major newspaper ran the story above the fold. Every cable news station looped footage of Kirk stammering. Sweat-beaded silence. But beyond the headlines was a deeper shift. Not just in perception, but in power. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers scrambled to respond. Republican operatives quietly deleted tweets once praising Kirk. Staffers began combing through old campaign disclosures to trace any links to Turning Point USA. Overnight, associations that had once been badges of youth engagement became political liabilities. At Turning Point's Phoenix headquarters, the atmosphere was apocalyptic. Senior staff fled meetings. Mid-sentence, legal counsel worked around the clock, shredding what could be shredded, bracing for raids. By sundown, 3 high-ranking executives had resigned. The board of directors, once steadfastly loyal to Kirk, convened an emergency session that lasted until dawn. But the truth was inescapable. The empire had cracked beyond repair. Meanwhile, social media was in full eruption. Young conservatives, once fiercely loyal, posted TikToks expressing heartbreak. "I believed in this," one woman said tearfully, holding up her Turning Point membership card before snapping it in half. Others shared receipts, photos, emails proving they had been part of a lie. One viral thread from a former field organizer read, "We were taught to ridicule the left for being naive. Turns out, we were the ones being played." The betrayal cut especially deep for students who had volunteered without pay, who had campaigned under Turning Point's banner, who had called themselves patriots, only to discover that their leader was siphoning foreign money into private jets and luxury real estate. On forums and group chats once used to organize rallies, words like grifter, traiteur, and sellout replaced slogans of freedom and liberty. Turning Point's official response, a 5-sentence press release blaming deep state interference, only worsened the backlash. It was instantly mocked, dissected, rejected. The press demanded answers. Donor demanded refunds. And no one believed the spin. Conservative influencers who had built careers by appearing on Turning Point stages began issuing carefully worded statements. Some distanced themselves. Others claimed ignorance. A few doubled down, but their follower counts plummeted. Even Kirk's most die-hard allies, like Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro, either went silent or shifted blame. It was as if the conservative movement had collectively decided to erase him in real time. The financial collapse was just as swift. By week's end, 4 major corporate donors had pulled out. Within a month, over 100 chapters had disbanded. The organization's fundraising pages were flooded with angry comments. Venues cancelled future conferences. Vendors refused service. Lawsuits stacked up like sandbags before a flood. Yet, amidst the wreckage, one figure stood taller than ever. Jasmine Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't flood TV appearances. Instead, she returned to her committee work with the same sharp focus that had dismantled Kirk. But across the country, the name Crockett became synonymous with accountability. Civil rights groups applauded her composure. Ethics watchdogs praised her precision. For many older Black Americans watching from living rooms and community halls, it felt like justice finally had a voice, and that voice belonged to a Black woman who would not be silenced. In Dallas, murals began appearing with Crockett's face next to the words, "We see you." At universities, young women carried tote bags with her congressional quote, "You got caught?" On talk shows, political commentators discussed the Crockett Standard, a new benchmark for congressional oversight. But perhaps the most powerful reverberation wasn't on TV or Twitter. It was the quiet reckoning happening inside young conservative minds. For the first time in years, they were questioning not just Kirk, but the entire culture that had enabled him. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a spiritual rupture. one from which the movement might never fully recover. The dust had long settled in the hearing room, but the tremors of that confrontation still rippled through American politics. Charlie Kirk's empire had crumbled, not in the slow, gradual decline of most political careers, but in a spectacular, historic implosion. And as the headlines faded and the cameras moved on, the nation was left grappling with a question far more enduring than any one man. What happens when a generation of political energy is built on a lie? For many Americans, especially older black voters who had seen decades of promises turn to dust, the Kirk scandal was not just about conservative corruption. It was about the machinery of power itself. It exposed how young passion could be manipulated, how patriotism could be monetized, and how unchecked ambition could rot even the most persuasive voice from the inside out. In the weeks that followed, Turning Point USA officially dissolved. Lawsuits mounted, donors vanished, and college chapters disappeared overnight. But the deeper collapse was cultural. For a movement that had marketed itself as the voice of a new conservative generation, the betrayal cut deep. Students who had once worn Turning Point pins with pride now described feelings of shame, confusion, and disbelief. Some left politics entirely, unable to reconcile their ideals with the reality of what they had supported. Others began asking harder questions, not just of their opponents, but of their own side. Across Capitol Hill, the mood had shifted. Jasmine Crockett's performance was more than a viral moment. It had become a blueprint. Lawmakers studied the hearing not for theatrics, but for technique. Oversight committees took note. Investigative journalists, long dismissed in partisan media wars, were suddenly back in demand. In classrooms from Howard to Harvard, clips of Crockett's interrogation were studied like case law. It was clear. Truth, when prepared properly, still had power. And for Crockett herself, the hearing didn't mark a peak. It marked a pivot. Her name now carried weight beyond her district, not as a provocateur, but as a professional, not for shouting, but for showing receipts. She declined multiple cable contracts and book deals, instead doubling down on what she called the work that still needs doing. In every interview, she brought the focus back not to Kirk, but to the donors who were misled, the students who were used, and the system that allowed it to happen. Yet perhaps the most powerful legacy wasn't in laws passed or elections won, but in what the scandal forced Americans to confront. That charisma is not character, that slogans are not substance, and that no movement, not progressive, not conservative, is immune from rot when scrutiny is dismissed and questions are silenced. Because in the end, the Kirk scandal was not an anomaly, it was a symptom, and Jasmine Crockett didn't just expose a fraud, she exposed a warning,